In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast, brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. My name is Ben Grant, joined as always by JB. We've got an exciting episode for you today. We have an exclusive interview with Mike Hogan, the communications manager and play-by-play voice for the Toronto Argonauts. That's coming up a little later in the show. And we're going to talk about the linebacker group, a group that we haven't had a chance to preview yet as we've been walking through each positional group. We covered the whole offense, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to those episodes, go on back through our archive, see if you can find them, because you do have to start getting ready for the season as we familiarize ourselves a little bit more with who's going to be out there for the double blue. So this week, it's linebackers. We covered defensive linemen last week, and we will have defensive backs for you next week. JB, let's get into some linebacker talk. Is it just as simple as, well, we've got Cam Judge, we've got Enoch Mwamba, there's nothing left to talk about? Because this will be a pretty quick episode.
I'm really excited about our linebacker crew. I think that is going to be an absolute strength for the Argos, and it really wasn't the last time we saw them on the field, and I think it's going to make an incredible difference. I think the improvements we've made at the defensive line will definitely help, but the size and the speed of our linebacking crew honestly has me really excited.
In the NFL game, I don't put too much value on linebackers. I think they are the least important position on the defense. I feel that way about NFL running backs as well on the other side of the ball. It's just not a position that I hold in high regard. I think they're fairly, you just find some linebackers, find a running back, worry about the other positions. In the CFL, it's really different because of that extra space and because of the fact that they're called upon so frequently to join in coverage. And so it's crucial that you have a good linebacking core. And we saw what happens when you don't in 2019, where we just got destroyed game after game because we just didn't have backers that could either keep up in pass coverage or shut down the run. And it didn't matter what Cleon Lang was doing. It didn't matter what Darby and Shaq were doing in the defensive secondary. The linebackers were a huge hole on this team. So to have that sorted out, these are going to be really good positional battles. As we were prepping for this week, I was thinking to myself, this might actually be a more interesting positional battle than the defensive line, which we were raving about last week in terms of the depth that they have. Let's start in the middle. So Enoch Mwamba, he's our Mac. How comfortable are you on a scale of 1 to 10 with he's going to be perfectly fine shutting down the middle?
I would give him, I think with a year off, I would rank it at 7.
I'm okay with that. That's pretty good. I feel pretty comfortable with that, especially given the depth we've got behind him.
There's no debating. 32 is right on the edge, usually for linebacker. It's a tough position to play. It requires a lot of speed and reaction, and that goes down when you get older. But my God, as a middle backer, he just hammers people. And if he has not lost a full step, it is going to absolutely change the tenor and the feel of this defense to just bring him through the A-gap and hammer some poor running back.
I looked at a lot of the Montreal film from 2019, and I actually didn't see too much of a drop-off, but I attributed some of the difference that we saw in his stats between 18 and 19 to just more of a system thing. It wasn't something that really reflected his play or any sort of drop-off. But yeah, I love the physical presence that he is in the middle. And if you've got one guy who can sort of single-handedly discourage an offensive coordinator from wanting to call runs up the middle, then it just gives everyone else a huge advantage. His play, even if it doesn't necessarily show up on the stat sheet, is going to make the rest of the defense better. And just by putting him out there in the middle, I think we're in a really good spot.
Yeah, I mean, being the middle, he gets to play in a phone booth a little bit, so the step is not quite as important as it might be if he's going down the field. So in that way, as a middle backer, I think you have some cushion where it's okay to be that age and to be in the middle, because we're not going to ask him, or I hope they're not going to ask him to chase people all over the field. What I picture, not to dip into my NFL too much, but what I picture is the same way New England uses Dante Hightower, where 2 or 3 times a game, that's it. You dial up that A gap, and man, he just destroys whatever's in front of him. And then the rest of the time, you're just playing solid, keeping the game in front of you football. I'm really excited. I think that the year off is going to help him. I think that he is, he's really instinctive, but he absolutely will change how we can run. And if the defensive line is what we think it is, those gaps are going to be there for him to get to.
Just as a preview a little bit for next week, I know we'd only just started talking about linebackers, but as you're talking here, it reminds me of why I want Alden Darby to be the free safety so much, because not only is he a great ball hawk back there and can range all over the field, sees everything in front of him, but having a guy like Darby at free safety allows Muamba to focus on the run, because Darby is so unpredictable from a quarterback's point of view. He gambles. He will fly in. He'll come tearing in to cut off those dig routes. And it means that Muamba has less to worry about, because the quarterback is going to be targeting the middle of the field a lot less with Darby back there, knowing that he may suddenly come flying in for a pick or flying in to crush a receiver coming across the middle.
I love that. I mean, that sort of defensively, philosophically, that has always been my belief. Let DBs cover the pass and let the linebackers cover the run. And I know that sounds simplistic, but I like that. Don't worry about putting him in space or being exotic. DBs have the pass. Let Muamba hunt, and don't have occasionally. Okay, fine. Occasionally, maybe you put him on the running back and you get burned, but they're not going to do that 30 times a game. Let him do his thing in the box, and used correctly, I think he is. He definitely has one more year of top football in him.
In terms of other Argonauts who can play that Mac position, there's really only 3 guys that we're talking about, and that's Bear Woods, Jack Cassar, and I guess Quimo we could put in there as well. He's played some Mac before. So I really think what this is going to come down to is if Muamba makes it to the season healthy and in good shape, I think unfortunately that may lead to the release of Bear Woods. And assuming Cassar has made the jumps that they have expected him to make over the last year, I think that might be it, because you're not going to walk out there with 4 middle linebackers. I don't think Quimo's going anywhere because of the value that he has as a special teams contributor. Obviously, Cassar is not going anywhere. You just drafted him. You haven't had a chance to see him yet. And so I think what this depth chart is going to look like is, again, assuming Muamba makes it to the first game of the season healthy, it'll be him, followed by Cassar, followed by Quimo. And I think that may be it for Bear. And if something does happen to Enoch, then that's probably Woods starting at the Mac with Cassar behind him, maybe looking to overtake him at some point in the year. And then Quimo is the third string. I don't see anyone else on this roster that I feel comfortable with as a Mac. And so I think that's a pretty easy way to sum up that position. But let's say Enoch Muamba does, let's say he's healthy. He's ready to go from the start of the year. Do you think there's any way that Cassar gets on the field in that case? Or is this just going to be spending a year learning behind one of the greatest Canadian linebackers, probably the best Canadian middle linebacker in the league?
I could not be more excited after watching Cassar film. I think they absolutely stole him. Probably he is a special teams ace, and situational blitzes. I could see that for Cassar for the first half of the season. That they'll bring him in and use his step to catch teams off guard, just not being used to who's this guy who comes off the bench and he has a first step they haven't seen before. I could definitely see that as he is getting acclimatized to the defense and learning how to play in the CFL. It's a big jump for anybody. So that's probably what he is.
Some of the fun I had this past week in watching a lot of that Trevor Hoyt film, the linebacker we just took out of Ottawa, is that he was, of course, Jack Cassar's roommate, but also a linebacking partner as he was out there playing the will spot. And it gave me an opportunity to watch some more Cassar film, but it's so hard to watch Trevor Hoyt film when Cassar is on the field at the same time, because you're like, it's like, hey, pay attention to this cat when there's like a bear juggling clubs on fire over here. So, as much as Hoyt was doing an amazing job, it's like you can't take your eyes off this machine in the middle.
His film is NC-17. It is not for minors.
It is.
I completely agree. If he can get up to speed, I think people are going to just be blown away. I think the first time he screams down the field and lights up a guy on kickoff, people are going to know his name and know his number. And when they roll him in, because you don't want to put too much. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult position to play at the professional level. So you don't want to bury him out there. Let him learn the game and let him learn, what they're doing at the professional level, and bring him in when you need a step on third down. And I think people are going to be really excited about him. I believe they have found a star.
Let's talk about the will spot. So is this as easy as the Mac and just saying, well, it's Cameron Judge? Because I think that's pretty easy for me. He's a few years younger. He looks just as good as Muamba does out there in my eyes. Yeah, obviously a different position. There's different responsibilities. Any chance of him losing the starting job?
I don't understand why Saskatchewan let him go.
I don't know why anyone let any of these guys go that are on our team. Look at our roster up and down.
I can see them. I can see the Muamba argument. You're like, he's 32. We're not going to win the Grey Cup next year. Doesn't make any sense to have one guy for one more year. I see the argument, but I don't get the Judge signing at all, or letting him go at all. He's young. He's healthy. He's really fluid out there. He's not as explosive as Jack or Muamba. It's not who he is. It's not what he's built to do. But he has nice quickness. He can surprise on a blitz and pretty good zone coverage. He is a very good Canadian linebacker, and he's an excellent tackler. And technique wise, I think just having a guy like that is so great for your defense, where he's going to make the play that you ask him to do. And a guy may catch the ball, but that's it. He's not going to run for a touchdown. It's going to be catch and tackle.
The battle for his backup, I think, is going to be really interesting. There's two guys that I really like, and I've gone back and forth on these two guys ever since I first sat down to put together a depth chart this year. So that's Richard Clayette and Nick Shorthill. So I'll tell you a little bit about Clayette, because he's a name that I think most Argos fans don't really know that well. He's an incredible athlete that just for whatever reason hasn't quite figured it out yet at the pro level. He's bounced all over the place, but you can see why everyone takes a chance on him and why the Argos have as well. So just taking in some of his numbers here. So first of all, we're talking about a 6'2", 225 individual. It's a decent size to have over at that will spot, but he can move. He ran a 4.4 at his pro day a few years ago. He had 21 reps on the bench press. Really respectable 3-cone at 7.2 for a guy that's 225 pounds, a linebacker. but he just couldn't stick anywhere. It was Houston, then Denver, then the Jets, the Cardinals, the Titans, the Chiefs. The Vikings finally was a place where he was able to spend 2 seasons on the practice squad, but ultimately they let him go in January of 2020. He got a little bit of an XFL season in there with the Dallas Renegades, and he looked okay. There were moments. His tackling wasn't great. He was really at his best when he was blitzing. That was sort of where he sort of seemed most comfortable. But he wasn't great in coverage. He missed tackles, some really key tackles too for Dallas. And so you see those numbers and you're like, well, if he can just figure it out, he's going to be sensational. And maybe on this big field, that extra speed will be something. But he hasn't quite been able to figure it out yet. And so we're taking a shot. Maybe this will be the team. Maybe this will be the situation. But I think, the more I think about it, as much as I love his numbers, I think this is probably Nick Shortill's job to lose. So I think in my next depth chart, I'm definitely going to have Shortill ahead of Clyett. But man, these two are going to be fun to watch in camp. Nick Shortill, the first time I really took note of him, I was aware of him playing at McMaster, but it was a conversation that I had with Coach Potasic at McMaster. This would be, I guess, 2015. And I had a couple of players that he was looking at. And we were just sort of talking about, the strengths and weaknesses and the program that I was with, and talking a little bit about McMaster as well. And I asked him, I said, who are you most excited about on this team? Like, who's going to be our next CFL star coming out of this Marauders group? And without even a second of hesitation, he's like, Nick Shortill. And just raved about him, went on and on about his football IQ, went on about his physical ability, but combined with that split-second decision-making. And Shortill's, he hasn't quite got that opportunity. When he did get those moments in with Hamilton, he looked great, but then, they were so stacked that he just wasn't getting the playing time. And so if he's able to get a little bit of time with Toronto, maybe he can show us what made him such a special player at McMaster, because he was unbelievable as a Marauder. But it's been a few years now, and he hasn't had that long stretch where he was able to play. And unfortunately, looking at this roster, it may unfortunately take an injury for him to really see any playing time, just like it did in Hamilton. But I think when he gets his opportunity, I expect Nick Shortill to be ready to go.
Well, we've looked at who we have at linebacker so far, and I think that stopping the run is definitely well in hand. Do you see any of the backers pushing for that cover backer spot?
It's such a tough call. It depends. It could be a situational thing. Like, I think ultimately for most downs, you're going to see a defensive back out there. And there's a bunch of them that could be in the running there that I'm excited about. But there are a few backers who have the speed and coverage ability. I think you could see Beck out there. I think Moore maybe has a chance. They've both got speed. They both have decent cover skill, especially Beck. When you watch some of his Eastern Michigan film, he was in coverage a lot. He was out in the slot all the time. So even though he was listed as a backer, he almost spent more time playing what you would typically classify as a defensive back role. And I quite like him in coverage. So he's a guy I'm really interested in seeing, but he just, like so many of these guys, we haven't really seen him play much football, and he's going to be a rookie when he steps out there on the field. So he's probably not quite ready yet, but that would be, I think between he and Moore, those are probably the two backers we've got. I just don't think Kozacek, I don't think he's quite got that coverage ability, and I don't think we're going to see Feeney over there. I think he's going to be more of a will. But yeah, those two may battle it out.
I'd rather DB there anyways.
I think most of the time, like unless you're looking at short yardage situation, in which case you're changing up the personnel anyway. But I think on your standard first down, you're going to end up with our typical 6 DBs out there, one of them playing that sort of Sam spot. Well, I got to say that was probably the most painless one we've had to go through, because it's so clear in Judge and Muamba that we're really talking about backup roles. But that's something to be so excited about. It's funny because I am excited about the defensive line, even though I have no idea who ends up starting there. I'm excited about the receiving core, even though I have no idea who ends up starting there. It's a different kind of excitement when you've got two studs like Judge and Muamba, where I'm excited because I know who's there. So it's a whole different feeling.
Exactly. we've looked at different positions and projected and hoped and looked at potential, but this is the first position where there is no projection here. These guys are studs. They are going to come on the field. They are going to be good, guaranteed, as long as everybody stays healthy. This is a great linebacking core. I think that's where my enthusiasm comes from, because we've had so much projection and conjecture and hope that, at every other position. And I feel really confident that this crew is going to be great.
So I had a chance to sit down with Mike Hogan this week, and it's the first time that, I don't know why, and he calls me out on it right at the beginning of the interview. And when I welcome him to the show, he's like, well, it's about time. And that's, I don't know, I have no idea why it's taken this long to get Mike Hogan on the show. It's such a natural fit for what we do. We talk about the Argos every week, and he's Mr. Argonaut. So I have no idea why it's taken this long. But it was such a great experience. We ended up talking for over half an hour. And so I don't have the full interview for you here on the podcast, but there is a video of the entire interview. So I've got about 15 minutes of it here, which is really the football highlights. We focus on talking about the draft and the unique situation he's in, where he actually gets to watch the draft unfold from inside the draft room and then write about it, which is so unheard of in professional sports. And I think that's such a cool thing that he's able to provide us with. And that's where most of our conversation goes that you're going to hear here on the podcast. But if you want to watch the interview in its entirety, the video can be found on our YouTube channel. You can also link to it from xsandargos.com, and we'll tweet it out from the X's and Argos Twitter page too. So here's my interview with Mike Hogan. I'm joined now by communications manager and play-by-play voice of your Toronto Argonauts, Mike Hogan. Thanks so much for joining me, Hoagie.
It's about time you asked me to come on your show.
It's true. I don't know why I haven't had you on. Actually, it's hard for me to explain. We've been on the air for I guess almost a couple of years now, and you are the voice of the Argos. You know more about the Argos than just about anyone else. I don't know why I haven't had you on to this point. So we fixed this. You're on, and if you're not careful, we may make this a habit.
I'm happy with that, and I'm very thankful for some of the exceptionally kind things you said about the articles we put up. So thank you for that.
Well, you've earned each and every one. So thank you for providing us with that content and with that insight into the organization, because it's like nothing else. So we're now a year into some form of lockdown. How are you holding up? Do you have any secrets for the rest of us as we hit what is hopefully the quarter pole going down the stretch here?
I think I'm like everybody else. I mean, it's been wave after wave after wave. And, last year, I kind of got myself mentally prepared by saying immediately, okay, we're not going to play this year. And if we start playing at Labor Day, woohoo, there's a carrot. And it just, obviously it never came to fruition. So I was prepared for last year. Even though it wasn't easy, if you allow me to get personal, I've been pretty strong mentally in terms of mental health. And at one point last year, in around September, after everything had been canceled, I reached out. We have a service within MLSE that allowed me to speak to somebody, and it really helped. But it was tough last year, and this year, again, it's come in waves. And I think after free agency started and, the Argos had the haul that we did in terms of free agency, it was like, okay, let's go. Now we're all excited again. And then after the draft, okay, now let's go. And even after the global draft, we're ready to go. And, anybody who says that the Argonauts are not wanting to play in 2021 is just missing the boat, because we really want to get on the field.
Yeah, well, it's always, it's from the same people that are always there to criticize the Argos. So on one side, it's you're spending way too much money. You're clearly way over the cap. Oh, and also you don't want to play. So, you can't have it both ways.
If we didn't want to play, if we weren't taking this seriously, I would have been out of work for a year. They would have laid me out. They would have laid so many people off in the front office. We had two people in ticketing. I think that was the only two layoffs that we had, and there were temporary things. But I think that was it. Like all of the people in football ops, everybody's kept their job, and everybody's worked exceptionally hard throughout all of this.
Yeah, no, that's really well said. And thank you also for speaking up about your personal situation. I mean, talking about mental health isn't easy, and it's a really important thing. And coming from someone like you, I think that's great to hear that you not only had the courage to reach out and talk, but then to tell us about that is a really big thing. And that's, I can tell you right now, no matter what we talk about for the next however many minutes, that's going to be the most important takeaway, because I think it will help people understand that, this isn't easy for anybody. And if you're struggling, if you're having any trouble, there are people you can talk to, and you should. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And I think we're doing a good job of sort of wiping that stigma away, because, like you said, it's there and it helps. It makes a big difference. So thank you for speaking very openly about that.
Well, 10 years ago, I think there would have been a stigma attached. And I think society has gone a long way in going and getting the message out that, you know what, it's normal. Nobody, if you got through the pandemic without having any mental problems at all, or questions or depression, or, oh man, you've got to be one of the few. And, I think of myself as being pretty strong, but I'm not perfect. And if me speaking up a little bit helps somebody, then it was worth it. But I didn't have any problem at all doing it or talking about it now.
So I want to talk to you about the CFL draft, not just the players that the Argos selected, but the process of covering the draft, because it's such a unique one that you are able to offer fans. And I think Argos fans maybe by now take it for granted a little bit, the access, the behind the scenes access that you have concerning the draft process. This is something that just simply isn't done with other sports organizations. And I understand why. So how were you able to convince the current and previous brass to allow you to cover the draft the way that you do?
This started when Barker and Milanovic was there. I forget what year it was. It was the Anthony Coombs draft. And you mentioned it in an article after the global draft. I was one of those guys that said, yeah, everybody always says that, we couldn't believe the guy was on the board that was there and that we got. So I went up to Barker and said, can I write this? Can I write what it's like to be in a draft room? And he thought about it, and he talked to Milanovic about it, and Scott was all in. He thought, this is a great idea, because it will allow people to see that, yeah, we are telling the truth when we say that we get our guy. It was real. I found it really eye-opening. They were so all in on Coombs that year that the way they did it is they literally had a board with everybody listed, not just by position, but, everybody on one list. And they had actually taken Anthony Coombs and put him down in the 9 or 10 slot in case somebody in the office had gone in, saw the board and talked to somebody. And then at about 6:30, when the doors were closed, they put Coombs' name back up to the number 1 and switched it with whoever was in the top slot at the time. So that was eye-opening. And that's where Jim said, you can talk about anything you want, just don't talk about other players, for the obvious reason that, okay, let's say we don't get a guy at 3, we pick at 5, and we're really interested in acquiring that guy. We don't want the other team to know that we're that excited and that red hot after somebody else. And also there were some names thrown around in trade talk that first draft, and I thought it was unfair to the player under contract because he wasn't dealt, to point out that his name was being discussed in a deal. So those are basically the only parameters I have. Don't talk about players that aren't selected by the Argos, and don't talk about anybody in trade discussions. And other than that, I'm basically allowed to write anything that I want and try to be as honest as possible. And, you're right. The Argos give access like no other team in North America. And I never take this. This is my favorite, and the free agency stories are my favorite articles by far to write, because I have no idea what's happening. I can't plan the article ahead because nobody knows how a draft or a free agency period is going to pan out. The Bo Levi Mitchell experience, the non-signing and the waiting was so interesting to be a part of when Pop made that offer to Bo Levi 2 years ago. It was incredible to be in that room and just, watching how the other people in the organization were so anxious to get on with other potential free agents, but couldn't. And then watching the draft this year, just some of the picks surprised everybody at where they went and who picked them in other instances and who didn't go. ahead of pick 7. So it was a really interesting process, and I hope I was able to convey that. The thing that I think would surprise anybody is how similar it is to a fantasy draft. And if you were on a fantasy draft with 5 of your friends constituting one team, there would be the discussion, okay, do we take them here or do we wait until the next round because they may be gone? Well, my buddy's a big Capitals fan. He wants Ovechkin. If we don't take him now, we won't get him. And that's, the kind of thing that goes on in this room with everybody taking the role, not everybody, but all the coaches are assigned another team. So, in this case, and I don't know specifically what the teams were, I would be surprised if Glenn Young wasn't Winnipeg, because he knows the situation. Steve McAdoo or Mike Davis would have been Saskatchewan. Coach Dinwiddie would have been Calgary. Guys who have that recent history with a team, they know what teams might be looking for or thinking about. They know the personnel. They know exactly what's going on. And when they have a mock draft, they will have that coach represent that team. So they have a flow and an idea of what that team may do. So I'm not going to give there are some other wrinkles they have in the mock draft that I find are fascinating, but out of respect, I'm not going to write or talk about those. But it's a remarkably similar experience to being in a draft room with your buddies for a fantasy league.
Well, you're giving me all sorts of ideas for my own fantasy football draft, so that's helpful at the very least. I'm going to have to do some more intel on the other guys drafting. It stresses me just you talking about it. I get stressed in draft auctions and things for fantasy football. The mood had, especially this year, was it stressful, tense? Maybe this year more than in years past.
In some instances, yes. The whole thing was about Nicastro, who they love. Where do we take him? We hope that he goes to 7. We hope he goes to 7. But by the time 7 rolled around, Dockstader was still there, which is something they didn't, with all of the mock drafts, they didn't think that they were going to have an opportunity to pick between the two. And it wasn't heated, but it was very passionate reasoning on, okay, why should we take Nicastro now? Or do we think he can slide? And there's where the mock drafting comes in. Would Calgary be more interested in Nicastro because he's a local guy? They also have McEwen at center. Would they want Nicastro as a guard? Will they use him as a backup in case McEwen, God forbid, get injured? So there's all of that discussion, and it was pretty split. And then, Vince Magri, who you've talked to and I think have gotten to know over the years, Vince is an loud guy by nature, but Vince really stood up toward the end. And Ryan Jansen from the league said, I forget what the time count was, but he says, Argos, you have 30 seconds. And he stood up and he said, basically on the Zoom call, and said, guys, we wanted Nicastro. We want them both, but our whole draft was, kind of around getting Nicastro in this spot. If Dockstader is there at 11, that's great, but let's get our guy. And everybody kind of said, you know what, you're right. He's the guy that we had where we wanted him. He was there. Our whole draft was kind of, okay, let's get Nicastro because we needed that. We got enough guys who can play guard tackle. We don't have that guy who can play guard center. And now we do. And the fact that Dockstader was there was, as I wrote in the piece, it was the easiest selection of the night because everybody said, yeah. The Dinwiddie said, do we still go with Dockstader? And he got Docks out. And, Coach McAdoo has this big voice, and the offensive line coach, and he went, yes. So that was the easy one. And I don't think in none of the mock drafts were the Argos able to get these two guys, and couldn't have been happier to get these two guys.
I like to imagine in my head that in the Calgary War Room, or the online version of the Calgary War Room, everyone was pounding their fists on the table in anger when it was announced that Peter Nicastro was taken. That's how I'm going to imagine things went down in Calgary, because I think that would be amazing. But I don't know. I don't think I would have gone that way. And that's where, I have so much respect for, Vince and Murphy and all the scouts and the coaches that do all this work, because, I know nothing. I don't have any experience as a scout. But in watching those two players on film, I really felt like Dockstader was going to be gone in the first round. I felt like Nicastro would probably be there in the second. I think I had him as an early third in my grading, which, again, it means very little. And so I think I probably would have been too nervous at losing Dockstader. But like you said, it was such a key to get somebody that could play guard and center. And I love Nicastro's center film. There wasn't a ton of it, but there was a game There's a game I watched. I think it was Calgary playing.
Was it Regina or Saskatchewan? Was it that game?
I think it was the Alberta
Okay.
Calgary game. He was playing center, and he was just annihilating everybody. I thought it was by far his best run game performance. And watching that one game, I was like, he might be a better center than he is a guard, which surprised me because I thought he was a very good guard. The reason I had him a little lower down is because I don't tend to grade guards, I don't think, as high as I do tackles. But if you need a guy that can play guard and center, he might have been the only guy in the draft that answers the brief. So in that case, you got to take him in that first round.
Despite the fact that I was an O-line coach for a year just after high school, I went back and helped out with the high school. I don't watch the offensive line with the same finite detail that you or Vince or Murph or certainly Mac or anybody like that do. But when I went back and watched a little bit of his video, and I threw this at Vince, and he went, "You know what? That's not bad." He reminded me of Don Picard, just the way he gets off the ball, and he's got that nastiness that Dom had, and physically he's 300-pounders. So to me, it's not obviously a mirror image, but just in some of the intangibles and some of the things that he brings, I thought Dom Picard was a good comparison, and if he has the career that Dom had, that's a hell of a pick at 7.
Yeah, I was on the Argos fan cast a couple days ago, and they were talking about the sort of nastiness, and they said he reminded them of sort of a lineman from another generation, an old school football player. And I thought that was a really great way to say it. When you watch him play, it does remind you of a lineman from years past, kind of like what you're saying. This sort of, he's not a giant. He's not 7 feet tall like seemingly everyone else that plays offensive line nowadays. They're even 6'8" guards, which drives me crazy personally. But it's so funny to look at that through the lens that they provided me with. I'm like, yeah, he's an old school football player. I think that's really cool.
If there's an instance where he gets in, because Cody Speller's obviously the starting center on paper. We'll see how everything plays out of camp. I don't think anybody's guaranteed a starting spot. Maybe Phil Blake. But if you have at some point on the field, if you have Nicastro with Blake and Bladek, holy crap, that's a lot of nasty in the middle of the field. For guys, I haven't met Nicastro yet, nor have I spoken to him, but the other two guys are pretty chill guys, but when they get on the field, they turn it on, and that's part of their on-field personality. If you had the three of those in the middle of the field, holy crap, I would not want to be an interior guy on the other side.
And one of the things I found, I don't know if it's the most interesting thing. There's so many great things from this article. And folks watching or listening at home, if you haven't checked out Mike Hogan's latest article, you should read all his stuff. Always go to argonauts.ca, read all of his articles. They're amazing. The insight is awesome. The access you have is unbeatable. But the piece on this year's draft, I thought was truly excellent. So if you haven't read it, you have to. But one thing you said in there that I thought was really cool was that it was Coach Dinwiddie who sort of stepped up and took the floor, which to me, I found odd. I thought in a good way. But there's always a hierarchy in football and in any business, and the Toronto Argonauts are both a football team and a business. And a coach like Bill Belichick, I would expect to step up and take the floor. But Coach Dinwiddie is a very new head coach. And to see him take charge like that must have been kind of interesting. I think that says something about both Coach Dinwiddie and also the level of comfort that Pinball Clemens has in himself and the staff around him. How did you see that?
I asked Mike about that afterwards, and I said, because and this might surprise you as well, when Barker and Milanovic were together, Barker, as hands-on as he is in a draft, gave the floor to Milanovic. So Milanovic would kind of be the traffic cop in that pairing, but, Barker obviously had all kinds of input and essentially the final say. But in terms of running the show, it was Milanovic. And what Pinball said was the coaches are all used to working with Ryan. So maybe they'd be more comfortable giving their opinion to Ryan than they would to me or to Murph or to Vinny. He said, we're all capable of doing it, but Ryan runs every one of their Zoom meetings. So why wouldn't he do that? And, obviously in discussion with Murph and with Pinball and Vince, it was Ryan who, is a film fanatic and would have gone over the minutia of every one of these draft picks. He would be, okay, who do we want to see here? When the third round pick was coming up, they had several names in mind and hadn't, we're kind of talking about who may go where. and they'd be talking about a guy, and then he was gone. It's like, oh, okay, well, who's the next guy? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, this guy, la, 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 la. That guy's gone. And it was 4 or 5 picks in a row where they were talking about a guy, and as they were talking about him, Ryan Jansen's voice would come on and say, the Shreveport Pirates have taken Joe Smith. And it was like, we were just talking about Joe Smith. And they were kind of laughing about it, but it was kind of funny if the stakes weren't so high, it was kind of funny to see everybody that they had been talking about and not necessarily deciding on, but at least bringing that name to the floor, being taken. And they may have taken Hoyt anyways, but who knows?
It's probably easier to laugh about when you've already got Nicastro and Doc Stater on the boat. It probably makes laughing about difficulties like that in later rounds more amusing than frustrating. You can imagine it going the other way as well. But it certainly worked out really well for this group. I'm interested in the Tommy Neal pick. I thought was really interesting. I liked him a lot, but I had a really tough time distinguishing a difference between he and a couple other guys like Dylan St. Pierre out of Ottawa. I really like Will Corby, U of T. I really like similar sort of, big physical slot receivers. What do you think it was? They got to interview all these guys. What do you think it was about Tommy Neal that made the difference for them to say, let's spend our pick on this McMaster receiver?
They got to know him really well. They know that there's a real value on special teams right from the get-go. He's a football player. First time I saw him was in his freshman year, and it astonished me. And I'm not going to make the comparison, but just in this one aspect, please allow me to do this. Andy Fantuz was great at high pointing a football in traffic. And I found Neal was able to do that as well, but not just on the short stuff, but on deep balls. He was really good at being able to go up and separate himself from sometimes double coverage. And that really stuck. I'm saying, this guy's a freshman. That's interesting. He ran a 4.6 something at the combine. Those certainly weren't, the gold standard of combine numbers this year. But I think that kind of surprised everybody a little bit. And they really love his character. They love his intelligence. Like, he's a football player who's going to come in essentially and compete on special teams, immediately. And, Levi Noel is 31 years old now. At some point, he's going to step away. And I'm not saying Neal is ever going to be the special teams player that Levi is, but, he's a guy that can eventually offer you more than just being that slot receiver. He can play several spots and, with some speed, and he's a Swiss Army knife on special teams where you can use him in more than one capacity. So I think that's the reasoning. And that's the guy, and again, I wrote about it, that's the guy that they talked about at 25. I have the sheet in front of me that my discussions with Vince Magri, and he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 names as the potential 7 pick. And he had 6 more names as a guy that may go at 12. And Tommy Neal's name is in that list. So that's how much Vince liked him. That's how much Vince liked Tommy Neal. So he got his wish just a lot later in the draft.
You can read all of Mike Hogan's work at argonauts.ca. You can follow him at Mike Hogan Argos on Twitter. Hoagie, you've been so generous with your time today. We've gone way longer than we planned, and I thank you so much for that. I really appreciate the time you spent with us. It's been awesome talking to you today.
Anytime. I always look forward to this podcast. There's a lot of great information, and the more information we can give Argo fans and let them get to know the players and the X's and Argos of the game, I think that's tremendous. So keep doing what you two are doing, and it's a privilege to be on the show.
Thank you so much. It's very kind. Mike Hogan, Communications Manager and play-by-play voice for your Toronto Argonauts.
Well, I'm glad we finally had Hoagie on. That was great.
He may have opened Pandora's box here, because we may be calling him on a weekly basis now to see if he can add some content to our show. But man, it was so much fun to talk to Hoagie. Well, that will just about do it for us on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. Again, thank you so much for listening. If you've got time, please rate, subscribe, leave a comment to help other Argos fans find out where we are. For JB, I'm Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.